These are dark psychology facts that 99% of people don't know, not because they're hidden, but because they're too subtle for most to recognize. They're not shocking, not entertaining. They don't live on the surface. They live in quiet moments, in silence, in routine conversations, in choices people don't question, because they seem normal. But behind that normal, something darker often moves. This isn't about tricks. It's about truths. This is not to teach manipulation, but to expose it so you can protect your mind, your peace, and your power. Let's begin. Fact 1. Most people don't want truth. They want emotional safety, even if it's built on denial. People say they want honesty, but what they usually mean is, I want the truth, as long as it doesn't hurt me. We think logic drives us, but most decisions aren't logical. They're emotional, instinctive, protective. When you tell someone a truth that challenges their self-image, you're not just offering information. You're pushing against the story they use to survive. So they push back, they defend, they deny. Because if that story collapses, they don't just lose a belief, they lose identity, control, certainty. And for most people, the unknown feels more dangerous than a comforting lie. So they lie to themselves, again and again. Not because they're dishonest, but because it feels safer. Safer than starting over. Safer than saying, maybe I was wrong. That's not weakness. It's human. But it's also why truth rarely wins arguments. Fact 2. What looks like love is often just emotional dependency in disguise. Many people think they're in love, when really they're in need. Need for validation, for identity, for certainty. So they latch onto someone, not to build a life, but to fill a void. They confuse closeness with control, obsession with devotion, possession with partnership. You'll hear it in phrases like, I can't live without you. You complete me. You're all I have. It sounds romantic, but it isn't. It's a warning. Because when someone makes you the reason they feel whole, they don't love you. They love what you give them. And the moment you stop giving, they turn cold, controlling, angry, even cruel. Real love doesn't demand you erase yourself. Dependency does. Fact 3. People conform more out of fear of being rejected than belief in what they follow. Look around. You'll see people echoing opinions they barely understand, repeating language they never questioned, wearing values like masks, not because they believe them, but because they fear being left out. This is social survival. For most of human history, being alone meant being in danger. We're wired to avoid that, so people align themselves with whatever keeps them safe, even if it means betraying their own thoughts. That's why someone who believes one thing in private can say the opposite in public, without flinching, because in that moment, truth matters less than acceptance, less than applause. Most people don't stand by principle. They stand by company, and they'll trade authenticity for belonging without even noticing. Fact 4. Some people provoke conflict because inner peace feels foreign and threatening. Not everyone wants calm. You'd think peace is the goal, but for many, peace feels like danger. Why? Because they've spent so long living in chaos, emotionally, mentally, sometimes physically, that when things get quiet, it feels wrong. Stillness makes them feel exposed, like something bad is about to happen. So instead of sitting with that discomfort, they start chaos themselves. They create tension, pick fights, escalate small issues, distract everyone, including themselves, from what they don't want to feel. This isn't always conscious. Often it's automatic. They're not addicted to drama. They're afraid of silence, because silence reveals the pain they've buried. And pain that isn't healed starts looking for someone to blame. Fact 5. Most people fear being ordinary, so they build false identities to appear rare. In a world obsessed with being special, being just human feels like failure. So many begin to perform. They craft curated versions of themselves, full of borrowed language, secondhand wisdom, and practiced depth. Not because they're malicious, because they're afraid. Afraid that if they show who they really are, flawed, uncertain, simple, they'll be ignored, dismissed, overlooked. So they build a false self, one that seems spiritual, or intellectual, or emotionally above others. But that self is hollow, and it needs constant attention to keep existing. Real depth comes from experience, from heartbreak, from learning the hard way. You can't fake that, not forever. Eventually the performance cracks, and what's left underneath is what they were running from all along. Fact 6. Most people don't listen to understand. They listen to protect their position. Conversation is often theater, each person waiting for their cue. You speak, but they don't absorb. They prepare. They prepare to reply, to correct, to reclaim control, because to truly listen means letting go of control, even for a moment. And that's terrifying for many. So instead of listening, they filter, they twist, they resist, not because your words are wrong, but because your truth might force them to change. And change requires effort, humility, reflection. So it's easier to interrupt, to dominate, to dismiss. Most people aren't having conversations, they're having rehearsed monologues with other people in the room, and the cost of that? Disconnection, misunderstanding, emotional distance disguised as debate. But now you've seen them, the hidden patterns, the quiet truths, the invisible architecture of how people operate, even when they don't know it themselves. This is dark psychology, not because it's evil, but because it hides in the shadows of everyday life. It exists in conversations that seem normal, in relationships that feel safe, in habits we defend, even when they're hurting us. And that's the hard part. Most people won't see it, not because they're blind, but because they're busy surviving, busy protecting the version of themselves they've always known. But awareness changes everything, because when you see a pattern, you no longer react, you respond. You no longer absorb, you observe. You no longer beg, you begin to walk away. This isn't about becoming suspicious. It's about becoming clear, grounded, strong, quietly unshakable, because you don't need to control others when you know how to control your attention. And once you understand people deeply, you stop being hurt by their confusion, you stop trying to fix what doesn't want to be healed, and you stop shrinking just to keep peace with someone who lives in conflict. Here's what most people miss. You don't need to change people. You just need to understand them so they can no longer change you. That's what this was for. Not for fear, not for bitterness, but for awareness. To see the deeper forces that shape behavior. So you can stop personalizing things that were never really about you. So you can stop over-explaining to those committed to misunderstanding you. So you can stop chasing peace in places built on confusion. Because now you know, people lie to themselves more than they lie to others. People choose patterns that feel familiar, even when they're painful. People mirror what keeps them safe, not what makes them honest. And when you know that, you stop taking it personally. You stop participating in cycles you didn't create. You start standing still while others spin. If this voice spoke to something in you, if this made sense where others only made noise, then stay connected. Subscribe to this channel, because this space isn't built for hype, it's built for depth, for the ones who think quietly, who feel deeply, who see what others miss.